Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the Ingenta free webinar with CLOCKSS. Hopefully you'll be able to hear us and see the actual presentation. CLOCKSS's mission is to preserve the digital scholarly literature for the long term, to ensure that scholars will continue to have access to the high value resources that they rely upon to conduct their research, even if that digital content should no longer be available from a publisher. CLOCKSS is a tax-exempt 501c3 not-for-profit organisation governed by a board of directors made up of librarians and publishers. Today, we're delighted to welcome as our guest speaker Craig Van Dyke, Executive Director of the CLOCKSS Archive. Before CLOCKSS, he was at Wiley from 1996 to 2015, most recently as Vice President, Content Management at Springer Verlag, New York from 1986 to 1996. Most recently as Senior VP and Chief Operating Officer. Craig served as Chairman of the Enabling Technologies Committee of the Association of American Publishers from 1995 to 1998 and was instrumental in the development of the Digital Object Identifier (DOI) system and of Crossref. He has served on the boards of directors of the International DOI Foundation, CLOCKSS, ORCID, Crossref, and the Society for Scholarly Publishing, and was a member of the Portico Advisory Committee. Craig's portfolio has always included industry collaboration to improve the infrastructure of scholarly communications. Craig, thanks so much for joining us today. I will now pass over to Craig. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for inviting me to speak with all of you today about CLOCKSS and long-term digital preservation. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity, and thank you very much for attending. Just so you can get your bearings, I have 17 slides. I expect to take about 30 minutes to go through them, so there will be time for questions at the end, and if you want to put questions in the chat, that would be a good way to do it. So, first I wanted to say a few words about why preservation matters. Scholars care because they rely on permanent access to digital materials to conduct their research. And the scholarly literature is long-lived. The wish to access content goes on and on and on. Preservation is important to libraries as well. Libraries historically have been the stewards of preservation on behalf of their communities. But in the digital publishing environment, most times libraries do not actually own a copy of the digital literature, and largely for that reason, an interest in third-party preservation services came about. Publisher-provided access can be unstable. Publishers can go out of business, or they can cease making a journal available. And this is particularly true of the newer and smaller publishers, of which there is quite a proliferation these days. They are the most at risk of disappearing. Funders also care about preservation. They want the output from their funding to remain available. And you may have heard of the CHORUS system. CLOCKSS integrates with CHORUS to provide a preservation aspect to the CHORUS system. And research institutes need their faculty to have access to materials and to be sure that the faculty's output will continue to be accessible. So with that introduction as to why preservation is important, here are some things I want to cover today. A little bit of an introduction, which to a certain degree Mike already covered. A couple of words about the technology we use and locks, our processes, our governance, some statistics, a few words about triggering content for access, and finally, some current challenges and our priorities for 2019. CLOCKSS is an acronym. It stands for Controlled Locks, and LOCKSS itself is an acronym, which stands for Lots of Copies Keep Stuff Safe. So CLOCKSS is a kind of acronym of an acronym. We began operations in 2009, and our goal is to ensure long-term access to scholarly literature for researchers. As Mike said, we are a freestanding 501, not-for-profit 501c3 in the US. We pay Stanford University for services. CLOCKSS is part of a diverse and robust ecosystem of preservation solutions. We are not the only preservation system, but we feel that each of the preservation systems has a little bit different characteristics, and a little bit of redundancy when it comes to preservation is not a bad idea. And we are part of a broader infrastructure for scholarly communications. For example, Crossref, ORCID, DataCite, Chorus, and even beyond that, things like publishing platforms, metadata standards, the Committee on Publishing Ethics, Transfer, Counter. There's actually quite a lot of infrastructure that is in place in support of scholarly publishing and communications. Libraries have done a good job over the past 15, 20 years making the case with publishers that archiving and preserving their content is important. I think libraries were the initial drivers of the creation of long-term preservation systems. I think libraries deserve a lot of credit for that. You know, libraries globally, university libraries spend $5 to $10 billion a year with scholarly publishers. So when libraries express a need, publishers are likely to pay attention to that. Now we have come to a point that publishers also agree and accept that preserving their content is important. Just in the last couple of years, I've noticed a kind of shift among publishers where they've sort of gotten the message that to preserve their content is one of the ways in which they can demonstrate that they are reliable stewards of the literature that they publish. And it's a kind of mark of credibility or authenticity on the part of a publisher, which I think is particularly important nowadays with such a proliferation of small new publishers. But at core, I feel that our preservation and archiving is really on behalf of libraries, libraries being, in effect, proxies for their communities, which includes, of course, their faculty, researchers, authors. We use the LOCKSS technology. We have 12 copies of the content at leading academic libraries around the world. In North America, at Indiana University, OCLC, Rice University, Stanford, University of Virginia, and University of Alberta. And in Europe at the University of Edinburgh, Humboldt University in Berlin, and the Catholic University in Milan, Italy. And in Asia Pacific at the University of Hong Kong, NII in Japan, and the Australian National University. Each of these 12 nodes or servers has a copy of all of the CLOCKSS content. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a slide or two. At this point, I want to say a word about the cloud. Oftentimes when we say we've got 12 copies on servers around the world, people say, well, why don't you use the cloud? And this is a topic that we are still analyzing. We do have some concerns about the cloud, security, proprietary systems, single point of failure, and the cost to access. But we are doing benchmarking work now, and I think I'm pretty confident that we will integrate the cloud as part of our environment in the coming years, but at the moment, not. We're still working through those issues. Our system has been certified as a trusted digital repository by the Center for Research Libraries. They did an audit called TRACK, Trustworthy Repositories Audit and Certification. We received a perfect score for technology, and if you want to read more about the LOCKSS technology, you can see David Rosenthal's blog, David Rosenthal being the chief scientist for LOCKSS. We were recertified just a few months ago. We were actually the first of the TRACK certified repositories to go through the recertification. And during that process, our score for organizational infrastructure was upgraded to the top score. So I think we have the highest cumulative score of any of the archives that have been certified. So the LOCKSS technology is open source software. It was invented at the Stanford University Library about 20 years ago. It's a unique technology solution. It relies upon multiple servers constantly cross-checking each other to ensure that the preserved data is valid. And this is done through a polling and repair mechanism where, in our case with 12 copies, those servers are continuously talking to each other at very low speeds across the internet. And they're conducting polls. They are all voting that they have the same thing. And if one of them says, no, I don't have the same thing as the rest of you have, then that one is outvoted, and their bit of data that is out of alignment is replaced by one of the other servers. So in this way, CLOCKSS is a dark archive, meaning end users do not access the content. And for any dark archive, there is the question, well, how do you know that the data is good, is not rotted or whatever? And this software is a way for a dark archive to continuously validate and repair the bits. There are many instances of the LOCKSS software at use in the world. The one that is maybe very well known and has been around the longest is what is called the Global LOCKSS Network, which has over 100 nodes. And in that network, each library endeavors to have a local digital copy of their own collection. And then other libraries in the network will have the same content. And so the polling and repair takes place among the libraries who have copies of the same content. In the Global LOCKSS Network, in effect, this provides libraries a kind of self-service post-cancellation access. If they lose access because of their cancellation situation with publishers, they have the option to utilize their local copy to preserve their access. There are 14 what are called private LOCKSS networks around the world. CLOCKSS is the largest private LOCKSS network, but there are others. Public Knowledge Project is pretty well known. Those are the people who do the OJS publishing software. There's private LOCKSS networks for Canadian government information, US government documents, and Cariniana in Brazil, and some others. Stanford is a kind of center of excellence for web archiving. So crawling the web and picking up content that is accessible is something that their library does a lot of. And they work in a close relationship with the Internet Archive, who is effectively just down the road. My view is that there is a spectrum of preservation solutions. At the low end is, you could call it just storage. Yeah, I have 2 copies or 3 copies or 4 copies. From my viewpoint, that's not really preservation, that's just storage. But some people call it preservation, fair enough. But I would call that sort of the low end of the spectrum. I think that LOCKSS is arguably at the high end of the spectrum of long-term preservation solutions. Just briefly, a couple of words about processes. We have basically two ways of getting content from publishers. One is file transfer, and the other is web harvest. And here I've provided links to our guidelines, which of course are available on our website as well. Most of the publishers we work with are smaller, and with them we use web harvest, meaning their publishing platform gives our crawler permission, and our crawler, we write a rules-based plugin at the beginning of our relationship with the publisher, and then our crawler goes and knows what to pick up and what not to pick up, because there's a lot on a publishing platform that is not appropriate for the long-term preservation. We find that web harvest is particularly useful with long-tail publishers, and by long-tail I mean those many very small publishers who may just have one journal or a small number of journals. Such publishers often don't have the infrastructure to provide us content by file transfer, so we can just go to their platform and pick up their content. File transfer we use most often with the larger publishers, the Elsevier's, Wiley's, Springer's, and others of the world. Just another word about the dynamic content. Dynamic content does present a challenge for preservation. We can't preserve all interactive features, but and that's especially true if we're getting the content by FTP. But if we are harvesting the content, we have the chance to pick up more interactive features. And what we have found is that the scholarly literature is getting more and more dynamic. And so we have a challenge to try to pick up more of that content. A good example is what are called enhanced ebooks, where this is particularly strong in digital humanities, where authors will build in all kinds of multimedia. It's more like a website than a book. And I'll probably say a little bit more about that as we go on. A few words about our governance, because I think this is a differentiator. Of course, I'm focusing on things that I think are differentiators for CLOCKSS. First, we're a dark archive. That in itself is not a differentiator. When we trigger content for access, and I will say a little bit more about that, we make it open access, which I think is unique to us because a lot of the literature that we are preserving is, of course, behind paywalls. But we have agreements with publishers that in those rare instances that we would trigger it for access, we have permission to trigger it as open access. A trigger is when digital content ceases to be available to end users. Or it either has disappeared from the web, or preferably it's in danger of disappearing from the web, and we find out about it before it disappears, so that we can work with the publisher or whoever is representing that content to have a seamless transition from the previous platform that the content was on onto the platform that our own platform for making it available. And this is one of the most important things we do because access must be ensured to support scholarship. There's a link here to the place where you can get at our triggered content. We've released 53 journals to date, and we have well over 20,000 in our system, so it's obviously a small percentage of our content. All of the rules and regulations around trigger events are defined in our bylaws and in our agreements with publishers. The triggered content is hosted at Stanford and at the University of Edinburgh. Here I am showing you an example of a triggered article, and apologies, it's not very visually appealing. I just picked this particular article because it seems to be one of the ones that is the most accessed. It's from a journal by the American Medical Association called Archives of Family Medicine. It's volume 4, 1995. This article is called Factors Associated with Having Eye Examinations in Persons with Diabetes. This article receives about 150 reference links per month using the Crossref DOI linking system. In other words, 150 times a month, a user accesses this article via a reference link from some other journal. So it's just an indication that the content that we have triggered, in some cases, still has a lot of life. A few more words about our governance. As Mike mentioned, our board is purposely equally comprised by libraries and publishers. We have 12 libraries and 12 publishers on the board. So we say that we are community governed. We are also community funded. Publishers pay fees to participate in the system, and libraries contribute, make financial contributions to the system. We're financially stable. Our revenue is about $1.6 million a year. We tend to make about a $100,000 surplus per year. A few months ago, we announced our succession plan, which I think is a really important thing. I think succession plans are important for any organization, but especially for a long-term preservation organization like us. I'm fairly proud of our succession plan. We have something called the trustee committee, which oversees our succession plans, and our plan is 4 university libraries have signed on that if CLOCKSS were to meet its demise, these university libraries have agreed that they will take over the existing content in CLOCKSS, and they will continue to run the LOCKSS software to continue to preserve the content. And those 4 are Stanford, Alberta, Edinburgh, and Humboldt in Germany. I just wanted to say another word about our governance to give you a little more feel for it. Our co-chairs are from Stanford University and Wiley. Our treasurer is from the Society for Industrial and Applied Mathematics. Our secretary is from the University of Alberta, and we have 2 at-large members of the executive committee from the Catholic University in Milan, Italy, and from the American Physiological Society. So a few statistics. We have about 270 publisher participants. Some of them come to us through aggregators who represent, 5 or 20 publishers, some number like that. We have about 300 library supporters, and again, some of them come to us through consortia of libraries. We have 32 million journal articles and books, adding about 4 to 5 million per year. Then these next couple of statistics I find kind of interesting. The 5 largest publishers are almost 80% of the content. However, long tail publishers, meaning publishers with only a few journals or less, comprise 65% of the publishers. So it shows you that while in some ways large publishers are dominant, in fact, there is plenty of room for small publishers, and there are a lot of them. There are a growing number of open access publishers. I think open access has kind of lowered the barrier to entry. The Directory of Open Access Journals, DOAJ, requires participation in an archive to receive the DOAJ seal, and that incents a lot of OA publishers to join us or other preservation systems. It is good that the DOAJ drives publishers to preservation because, in fact, these long tail publishers who are mostly OA are the most at risk because they are kind of the least robust, and they tend to kind of come and go a little bit more than some of the more traditional publishers. When publishers come to us saying they want to join, we always vet them. We don't consider ourselves an arbiter of quality. Our primary thing is to make sure that they are not what you would call a predatory publisher. We used to consult Beale's List, which is kind of defunct now. Cabell's white and black lists is a resource that we consult. We also we poke around on the web a little bit to see what we can see about a publisher. And we do sometimes reject publishers on that basis, which is kind of an uncomfortable position for us to be in, and we want to be very careful about it. But the truth is that at times we do, because we feel that we need to maintain the standards, appropriate standards for our preservation system. Another criterion we have for agreeing to preserve publishers' content is that we want to see them have some publishing activity. If they haven't published anything yet, we will say to them, well, come back to us in a year when you've published, and we want you to demonstrate that you're a going concern. So a few more words about triggering content. We have rigorous rules and practices that are written into the bylaws, which require a 75% board vote in favor of a trigger, with no more than 2 board members voting against a trigger. So quite a lot of care is placed here. In real life, frankly, this hasn't been very controversial when triggers have come forward. They've gone through. There is one exception where we chose not to trigger some content because we felt that a publisher was kind of abusing the system because they were just using it as a cheap alternative platform for the content. And we didn't like that very much, so we said no. So we've triggered 53 journals. They receive about 1 million article downloads per year and 5,000 DOI resolutions per month. So 5,000 times per month, an end user at another journal is clicking on a reference link and coming to an article in one of these 53 journals. And as I said, they're open access. We use a Creative Commons license. Publishers can specify the Creative Commons license that they would like us to use when we provide access, but so far nobody has chosen anything other than our default CC license. So if I think about challenges and things I'd like to bring forward to this audience, one is preserving the long tail. As I've said a few times already today, there is quite a growing proliferation of small OA journals. And the truth is, we don't even know about them sometimes. And if such a journal is important, and if it is not in a preservation system, we would like to know about that. What we found is that many times these small journals maybe are not important in general, but there may be a certain number of colleges or universities where that subject is an important part of the curriculum. And we look to libraries to come to us and say, hey, this particular journal is important, but it's not participating in any preservation system. So I'm soliciting from the librarians in the audience and also publishers. If you're aware of journals that are not being preserved, first you should talk to the publisher about it, but also talk to the preservation services, because we also would reach out to the publishers. And the other thing that I would raise here for your awareness pertains to financial support for a sustainable, diverse, and robust digital preservation environment. And when CLOCKSS started, our revenue was half from libraries and half from publishers. What has happened over time is that the library revenue has been static. So the good news is, we're maintaining the library revenue, but it hasn't been growing. The publisher revenue has been growing. And today, we get 2/3 of our revenue from publishers and 1/3 from libraries. I think it would be healthier if we get half of our revenue from libraries, so that libraries are full partners, as they should be, and as they are on our board of directors, for example, full partners in maintaining the system. I think any service should be paid for by the parties who receive the benefits. And I think publishers, libraries, who in some ways are proxies for authors and researchers. So I would ask that libraries consider preservation as part of your budgeting and funding plans. And of course, when I say that, I'm fully aware of the budgetary constraints that libraries work under. I believe I am coming down the home stretch here. Priorities this year? Well, we are always investing in our hardware and software to build up our capacity and to improve our timeliness. Actually, last year we finished a global hardware refresh where we positioned new servers in all 12 of our libraries. And the software is undergoing a re-architecture right now that's going to be released later this calendar year. Some of the components are already integrated into the LOCKSS software. The re-architecture is making the LOCKSS software more modular and more open. By more open, what I mean is it's already open source, but it's bringing in more other open source components, for example, from the Internet Archive. And the hope is that by modularizing it, some of its components, like the polling and repair, could be adopted by people who maybe don't want to use all of the LOCKSS software, but have an interest in the polling and repair functionality, which is sort of the key differentiator, I think, of the LOCKSS software. As I said earlier, the scholarly literature is diversifying, and we are bringing in new content types, for example, software, digitized archival collections, video, data sets, databases, interactive scholarly works, or sometimes called enhanced ebooks. And some of these, for example, data sets and video, present a challenge concerning scale. I think our archive right now is maybe right around 100 terabytes, but there are some data sets out there that approach that level of scale, or collections of data sets. So one of our technical challenges right now is to confront a different order of magnitude in terms of scale, so that we can offer an acceptable cost. I mean, we can handle large scale now, but bringing it to the market with an acceptable cost is another matter. So that's a challenge for us. And we're always working on trying to be as transparent as possible. We do an annual report that goes out to all of our publishers and libraries, and trying to increase our level of outreach by doing things like this. I just wanted to give a few sort of specific examples of some of the new content types. There's a collection of software out there called Code Ocean that we have found a good partner to work with. They are, if you will, a kind of third party of author-created software. The software in their system is almost entirely supplementary material for published articles or proceedings articles, journal articles or proceedings articles. So it's a handy way for us to get our arms around software when it is supplementary material. And the good thing about working with such a third party is that they do a certain amount of normalization. So it's easier for us to work with them. Digitized archival collections. We're now preserving something called Divided Society, which is from the Lennon Hall Library in Belfast, which is a collection of a lot of materials from the 70s, at the time of the Troubles. Very interesting collection. We are also now preserving the Crossref metadata database. So those are some examples of different kinds of content. So in summary, we report our holdings at the Keepers Registry. Here's a link for Keepers Registry. We also, of course, have this link on our website. I should have mentioned the Keepers Registry earlier when I was talking about journals that are not being preserved. The Keepers Registry is a handy way to check that. I think they have, I don't know, about 10 repositories that they keep track of. I won't name their names, but ones that you would be familiar with, including CLOCKSS and LOCKSS and others. So if you're interested in finding out if a journal is being preserved or what systems it's being preserved in, you can go to the Keepers Registry and learn about that. I hope that you will feel that this presentation is a kind of introduction, not only to CLOCKSS, but to me. So please feel that you have now met me, and please feel free to contact me. I'm always happy to talk about preservation, whether it's the technical aspects, policy aspects, or practices, and whether it's directly about CLOCKSS or more broadly about preservation, because there are a lot of use cases concerning digital preservation that are outside of the academy, for example, museums or cultural artifacts in national libraries. Those are all very interesting examples of long-term digital preservation as well. So with that, I thank you for listening to me for so long. If I can just add, I want to encourage again people to get in touch with me. The last time I did a webinar, after the webinar, there were a few people who came to me with questions. Either they didn't think of them during the presentation, or didn't want to ask them, or maybe they thought it was more a one-to-one conversation. But I do want to encourage people to get in touch with me if there are things that from today's webinar that you want to follow up with me about.
Well, thank you very much for that, Craig. That was very interesting, and hope all those listening found so too. Ingenta will be running other webinars, so please check out the Ingenta website events page for more information and to register for these. Please also check out the Ingenta webinar recordings on the Ingenta YouTube channel. To get in contact with us about any of our products, please contact info@ingenta.com. You can also follow us on Twitter. Our hashtag is @WeAreIngenta. We hope you can join us for the next webinar. Thank you very much. Goodbye.